Welcome everyone. You are listening to Kommuninvest Investor Briefing. We are standing at the end of another turbulent year, a year where bad news, like slower growth, have been interpreted by the market as good news in the ongoing battle to reduce inflation. We will soon take a look at what impact higher interest rates have had for the Swedish local government sector. We will also summarize the year of 2023 for Kommuninvest long-term funding. And last, but definitely not least, we will glance to the future and present to you our long-term funding forecast. My name is Märta Petrini. I work as a funding manager at the debt management team. In the invitation, we have asked you to send your questions to us prior to this meeting. Thank you for that. We value your input, and we hope that this presentation will give you answers. For any investors who are not yet familiar with our mission and who we are, let me give you a quick presentation. We are Kommuninvest i Sverige AB. We are owned by 96% of all the municipalities and regions in Sweden. We are the largest lender to the Swedish municipality sector, and we play an important role in the development for Swedish welfare and the transition to a more sustainable society. We have the highest credit rating possible from 2 separate credit rating institutions. And our bonds are classified as level 1 and the risk weight is 0. For further information, please go to our webpage. There we have the investor presentation available for you. Or you can reach out to us after this presentation. So, December 2023, how is the Swedish economy doing? And what are the major challenges for the Swedish local government sector going into the next year? Mattias, please tell us what you work with and guide us through these questions.
Thank you, Märta. My name is Mattias Bokenblom, and I'm a senior analyst at Kommuninvest Small Research Group. We are following what's going on in the local government sector in Sweden with respect to investments, debt, and debt management. And if you want to read our reports, they are on Kommuninvest homepage, and most of them are translated into English. Today, I will briefly talk about how the present macroeconomic environment is affecting the local government sector. And there will be no graphs and table this time because we are covering a lot of material, but there will be some talking points on each slide. So let's jump into the macroeconomic environment. I think that one former Swedish chief economist at a large Swedish bank said it best when he said, Riksbanken will continue to hike rates until something in the economy breaks. And what broke first? Well, the market for residential housing. When it comes to new construction of residential housing, the numbers have plummeted during this year. It's down 66% the first 3 quarters this year compared to 2022. The other thing that we have seen in the third quarter now is that the labor market is weakening as well. And this affects our clients and owners, the municipalities and the regional authorities, quite a lot, since most of the income taxes in Sweden are collected by them. And if the labor market is getting weaker, tax revenues are shrinking. And that is something to look out for 2024. The good news in all this is perhaps that Riksbanken will perhaps not hike rates anymore. We do not do any interest rate forecasting ourselves, but if I look at the market right now, I can see that they have priced in several rate cuts during next year. And that is perhaps the good news with all these bad news. Well, so how does this affect the local governments? Well, inflation has caused costs to rise quite a lot for municipalities and regional authorities, not primarily due to higher prices on goods and services, but rather through the pension agreements that are within the sector. they are mostly linked to inflation, and when inflation rose, the cost for pensions rose as well. And this is the main reason why the large surplus that we saw in the sector in last year, in 2022, will turn into a deficit next year. And how are local governments handling this? Well, if you look at the news, you can see that many municipalities, many regional authorities, they are announcing that they will do spending cuts, and some of them will also increase their tax rate during next year. And this is to mitigate the high costs that they are facing due to the pension agreements that they have. One thing that we would like to emphasize is, even though next year will be a difficult year with deficits for most municipalities and regional authorities, the sector as a whole is entering into this situation from a very strong financial position. The solvency rate, for example, in the sector has increased quite a lot the last 15-20 years. And so it's from a position of strength that we are entering into some difficult years ahead. When it comes to investments, levels will continue to be high, but slightly lower if you compare to the level before the pandemic. We can see that the demographic pressure is subsiding somewhat. Fewer kids are being born in Sweden, and this means that the municipalities, their need to build more preschools and schools is decreasing, and thus investment in that area will be lower. At the same time, we can see that the housing companies that are owned by the municipalities, there are about 300 of them, they will invest less as well due to the situation in the residential housing market. So that will put a downward pressure on investment levels. However, we can see that there is still a huge need to upgrade the existing infrastructure, both the one above ground, all the facilities and buildings that are owned by the sector, as well as below ground. Water and sewage pipes, for example, need to be replaced at a faster rate than has been done today. So taken together, slightly lower investment levels, but still on a high level. These investments need to be funded, and our funding forecast says that debt will increase at a lower pace compared to the situation before the pandemic. Before the pandemic, debt rose by 6, 7, sometimes 8, 10% per year. This growth rate will be much lower the coming years. We expect it to be around 4% on an annual basis. However, there are some uncertainties in this. If the economy develops worse than we think, the need for funding will be greater for both municipalities and regional authorities. On the other hand, if the economy develops worse than we think, the local governments will pull back on their investments and thus decreasing their investment needs. So there are a lot of uncertainty in these numbers, and we are following the development closely. Having said all this, what we can see is that even though the growth rate of the sector's debt is lower, Kommuninvest continues to increase its market share. Our lending is growing faster than the debt is rising in the sector. And with that, back to you, Märta.
Okay, so let's now switch from a macro view and look at some highlights for our long-term funding 2023. When we stood here in December last year, we presented a funding forecast that stretched from 130 to 150 billion. We can now conclude that we have reached the upper level of that forecast, and this is mainly due to customer demand. Our long-term funding year to date amounts to 148 billion. And please bear in mind that we do have one more auction left before the year is over. Our funding this year have been divided between our three strategic markets: the SEK market, the Euro market, and the US dollar market. About half of our funding this year came from the SEK market, similar to last year. In February, we launched a new bond under our Swedish benchmark program, K2911. Looking at the whole outstanding funding portfolio, summarizing both green bonds and conventional bonds, SEK represents a share of 65% in the whole portfolio, and the rest is international funding. One milestone this year is that we have managed to increase our funding or our presence in the Euro markets. And with 4 outstanding bonds, we now have a Kommuninvest Euro curve. Let me explain the rationale behind this shift. In 2020, we formally decided to include Euro as one of our strategic markets. That, however, did not mean that we rushed to that market and borrow money immediately. When in the process of deciding what currency to issue, we look at several factors. We start internally by looking at our liquidity forecast, what volume to issue and what tenor. We also look at the structure of our balance sheet. We aim to match the duration of our assets with the duration of our liabilities. So when our customers go further out on the curve, that increases the incentive for us to issue bonds with longer maturities. We also look at price and market conditions. We obviously aim to borrow money in markets that are most beneficial for our customers, and this typically means in markets that indicate the lowest funding cost for us. Another important factor in the process of deciding both currency and tenor is investor demand. The dialogue we have with our lead banks is crucial for us to get our head around the market sentiment and what investors are looking for. The graph in this picture illustrates our 5-year funding cost versus 3-month STIBOR. We can see that the Euro market, which is represented by the green line in this graph, has been relatively attractive for us during this year. That was not the case a few years ago. This year, however, the Euro market has definitely been an option for us when we have had the need to issue bonds that are longer than 3 to 4 years. When it comes to investor demand, we saw a stronger demand during the first part of the year, and that explains why we have been more active in the Euro market during the 3 first quarters and not so active during Q4. Another milestone that we want to highlight this year is the growth of our sustainable lending. The growth of green labeled loans corresponds to 12 billion. That is almost 50% of the total increase this year. This development made it possible for us to increase the share of our green funding with 3 percentages. More than a fifth of our funding 2023 was money that contributed to the green transition within the Swedish local government sector. We are also very glad to see an increase of committed and dispersed social loans this year. We now have almost 7 billion committed loans with a social label. And this development strengthens the conditions for us to issue our first social bond in the future. We have heard from Mattias that the funding within the local government sector will continue to increase in a moderate pace, quite similar to this year, with an increase of about 4%. Tobias, can you please talk to us about the implications for Kommuninvest and how this relates to our funding forecast? And can you say anything about the volume of green and social bonds that we might issue this year?
Thanks, Märta and Mattias, for the comprehensive presentations. We've heard that inflation has caused pension costs to rise. Surplus in the sector for 2022 turns into a deficit in 2024, but at the same time, the local government sector as a whole has a very strong financial position. So what does this equate to when it comes to the funding budget for 2024? We forecast that the budget will be 130 to 150 billion Swedish krona in funding longer than 1 year, which is the same as we had in 2023. We think that the strategy to fund this volume in the two most liquid markets, US dollars and euro, together with our home currency, Swedish krona, is still the best strategy for us. As mentioned earlier, our green funding have increased in 2023, and we are very pleased with the development of the euro issuance that we've done this year. And for 2024, we have 8.5 billion Swedish krona and $1 billion that matures in green bonds during the first half of the year, which will be refinanced with new green issuance. We also estimate a growth of at least 10 billion Swedish krona in green lending, so there will be further issuance from us in the green format in 2024. Another development that was mentioned is the growth of our lending for social sustainability projects. We have seen an uptick when it comes to approved projects, approved volumes, and also dispersed volumes. So hopefully this can equate to our first social bond issuance during next year. One question that we have received is the way we issue in the Swedish benchmark program, and will we continue with that? I will take a step back to explain the issuance process. Since 2020, we offer bonds in the Swedish market via auctions. We auction out our bonds on Wednesdays between 9 and 10. On our webpage, you can find the auction schedule and which bonds that can be offered each week. And this is a process that we have been working on for a number of years, and the method suits our business model very well. Our clients borrow from us on an ongoing basis, so we have a constant outflow of money. In order to run our business with as low risk as possible, we adjust the volumes in the bonds we offer on a weekly basis to match the volume of the lending. But we have a predetermined schedule so that the market knows which bonds that can be offered on a weekly basis. We try to be as transparent and predictable as possible and not surprising the market. And as you can see in the graph, we keep volumes fairly stable between weeks. And this method is something we will continue with going forward, unless we hear something very negative feedback on the method. Last but not least, we focus a lot on sustainability at Kommuninvest. Sweden is to be climate neutral in 2045, and the local government sector have very ambitious goals, in many cases even higher, in order to achieve that. We are engaging more time and resources than ever in many different areas to help our owners in the work of transitioning to a more sustainable future, and with the executive management closely involved. And just to highlight a few things that we are currently working on, we have engaged 2 banks to help us adopt our framework, our green bond framework, to be more taxonomy aligned. It's within the significant contribution criteria we are primarily focusing our resources. The taxonomy is a European framework, which isn't always taking in the local angle into consideration, and is not a perfect fit for the local governments in Sweden. We don't want to set the bar too high, so that our clients choose to borrow conventional from us instead of through our green bond framework. But we have a first draft which have been sent out on a public consultation, and we've had good response on that. Our goal is to have a framework in place, a new framework in place in Q2 24, and to be used for lending in Q3 24. And as mentioned, ESG factors will be more integrated in the whole company, and the E factor have been integrated in the credit process, both when it comes to credit assessment process and the risk management. The board of Kommuninvest have adopted a climate plan, and ESG factors are integrated into the Communinvest business model in a pragmatic, efficient, and well-defined way. Communinvest is a tool and support in the Swedish municipal sector's own climate work by calculating and monitoring financed CO2 emissions, including establishing a pathway for reducing them, and also offering advisory support linked to ESG risk factors. So this concludes this year's presentation, and thanks a lot for listening in to us. And if you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. And we wish you all a restful holiday season, and see you all next year. Thank you.